Welcome to The Explainer. We've got to talk about this massive disconnect that you've probably been feeling lately. You see these top-line economic reports on the news telling us everything is just great, right? But then, the daily reality for millions of working families is the exact opposite. People are employed, they're working super hard, and yet they still feel completely broke. So today, we're putting on our policy expert hats to analyze the systemic barriers driving this cost of living crisis. We're going to dig into the data, break down the numbers, and figure out exactly why the modern economy has turned basic survival into an uphill battle.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to tackle the employment illusion, measure the purchasing power gap, explore the monthly household squeeze, see what happens when wages fall behind, and finally, look at the community ripple effect.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the employment illusion. Why working doesn't always mean surviving.
For decades, we've been fed this economic myth that if you just go out and get a full-time job, boom, you're guaranteed financial stability. But as we'll see, that's just not true anymore. We're breaking down that outdated idea today using a really important policy term. It's called ALICE. That stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. Coined by United for ALICE, it perfectly describes households earning above the federal poverty line, meaning they don't usually qualify for massive assistance programs, but they still don't make enough to cover the basic costs of modern survival. We're talking about our essential workers, our teachers, our delivery drivers. They're fully employed, yet totally income constrained. It just goes to show you can't measure this crisis by employment numbers alone.
And here's where the math really starts to break down. We have to look at the inescapable costs of modern living. Things like rent or a mortgage, utilities, groceries, transportation, childcare, healthcare, and let's not forget existing debt payments. Think about it. A family might have a totally steady income, but if every single paycheck is already completely spoken for by these basic categories before it even hits their bank account, that household is fundamentally vulnerable. Having a job doesn't equal stability when mandatory survival costs are eating up absolutely every last dime.
Moving on to Section 2, the purchasing power gap, or inflation as a monthly budget problem.
Okay, let's move from the big picture myth down to the micro reality with some hard numbers. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the All Items Consumer Price Index, or CPI, went up 3.8% over the 12 months ending in April 2026. Now, on the evening news, you'll usually hear inflation tossed around as a sterile percentage just like this. But you and I both know families don't experience inflation as a percentage. They experience it as having way less money left over at the end of the month. So while that 3.8% gives us a baseline, we really need to dig a bit deeper to see where the real damage is being done.
When we break down those April 2026 numbers, the picture gets a lot clearer. The overall inflation baseline is sitting at 3.8%, and the food index is up 3.2%. But look at that staggering spike in energy. It's up an incredible 17.9% over that exact same period. By isolating energy and food, you can clearly see this stark loss of purchasing power exactly where it hurts families the most. This is exactly why working folks feel poorer right now. The things they absolutely have to buy are skyrocketing, way past that baseline inflation rate.
Which brings us to Section 3, the monthly household squeeze, the inescapable cost of basic survival. How many times have you heard people say, "Oh, you just need to budget better"? Well, you simply cannot budget your way out of the grocery budget trap. Food is one of those expenses you just can't avoid. You can delay a vacation, sure, but you can't stop buying groceries. Here's how it plays out. Step 1, prices for everyday staples go up. Step 2, brings shrinkflation. That's where the package sizes actually shrink, but you're paying the exact same price, meaning you pay the same for less food. And then Step 3, families have to start relying on credit cards just to eat. So they aren't just paying more for food, they're actively losing their financial flexibility and literally converting their daily meals into high-interest debt just to survive.
And then there's the energy sector. Remember that crazy 17.9% energy inflation we looked at a moment ago? Energy and utility costs create this massive, hidden squeeze because, well, you can't exactly opt out of electricity, gas, or water. It's a systemic barrier. You can't just call up and negotiate your water bill down. And unless you plan on reading by candlelight and totally unplugging your refrigerator, you're stuck paying for electricity. When energy costs jump 17.9%, it acts like an unavoidable, mandatory tax on a family's basic existence.
Let's look at Section 4, when wages fall behind, the static income trap.
So, we've seen how skyrocketing costs are absolutely crushing budgets. But what about the money actually coming in? When you pit rising costs directly against static income, you really see the trap working families are caught in. On one side, we've got those inescapable costs. Energy is up 17.9%.
groceries are up, and utility and housing bills are surging. But on the other side, static income realities. Somebody might get a small 2 or 3% raise at work, which is great, until it's instantly erased by inflation. On top of that, a lot of workers rely on unstable gig work where their pay fluctuates wildly. And because they've had to use credit cards to buy those groceries we talked about, high debt is now severely reducing whatever monthly cash flow they had left. The math just doesn't work.
This brings up an incredible quote highlighting a framework from the Economic Policy Institute. It goes like this: "The issue is not only whether wages rise, the issue is whether wages rise enough to cover the full cost of living." The EPI actually measures what it takes to reach a modest yet adequate standard of living. And I think this just brilliantly illustrates the core failure in our current policy landscape. A 3% raise is effectively a massive pay cut if your basic living expenses just went up by 10 or 15%.
Now, it's absolutely crucial to point out that this crisis does not hit everyone equally. A household with wealth has a buffer. They can dip into savings for emergencies and absorb those higher insurance or energy costs. But a household without wealth, which due to historical and systemic gaps disproportionately affects Black households and other marginalized groups, has absolutely no buffer. Without that wealth, they have to use credit cards to survive, they fall behind on bills, and they often end up delaying basic medical care. This systemic gap strips away any semblance of a safety net.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, the community ripple effect, how household pressure weakens infrastructure.
We're going to zoom back out to the macro level now, because this isn't just an individual family problem, it's actually a systemic threat to local economies. When a family faces intense household pressure, like less disposable income, mounting medical debt, or food insecurity, there's a direct community effect. Think about it. With less disposable income, local small businesses lose their customers and risk going under. When families are saddled with medical debt, they delay preventative care, which just heavily strains the broader healthcare system later on. And when there's food insecurity, local nonprofits, schools, and food banks see a massive spike in need that they often can't even meet. Our local businesses and infrastructure literally starve when working families are squeezed.
So, what's the big takeaway? It comes down to what we call the 99% perspective. This cost of living crisis is the daily version of the economic crisis. It's a fundamental policy failure. The overarching economy might look completely stable if you're looking at it from a Wall Street perspective, but down on Main Street, the economy is completely misaligned with the basic cost of survival. People are working harder than ever, yet the system is set up in a way where just surviving consumes absolutely every single dollar they earn.
Which leaves us with one final vital question. We hear the reports all the time. We see the GDP numbers. The economy is growing. But who is it actually growing for? If full-time workers can't even afford groceries and electricity without going into debt, we absolutely have to rethink our broader systemic narrative. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep asking the tough questions, and I'll catch you next time.